Armchair History TV is the newest place to find your favorite history content creators. It's ad-free, unlike this, unfiltered, with an extensive library of over 150 videos and counting, with an exclusive podcast and Discord community to help you keep up with all the action. Use code HISTORYLAND for 50% off your subscription.
Record button off the bat. Excellent. Well, that went really well. That was really good, detailed, coherent beginning and end stuff, Irene. Super impressive. I can never tell stories with that amount of detail with anywhere near as much.
It's my OCD. I like to call it that.
Well,
it's documentation.
Well, it's working for you. I wish I could be that precise, and you painted a great picture as well of the entire thing. So now we move on to how basically a massive war starts from an ambush in the forest, and again, because George Washington is the point man for all of this, I believe he gets sent back into the Ohio, doesn't he?
Yes, and this is because he becomes commissioned to command a small regiment, provincial regiment, to deliver Dinwiddie's warning to the French on the Ohio River Valley. And that's on 24th February when, he gives command of the command of that particular force to, Major General Washington, with the general commander of all the Virginia regiment under General Joshua Fry. And around the same time, on 17th of February, 41 men under a trader named William Trent are sent to build Fort Prince George on the location Washington had identified as a very strategically feasible confluence of the Alleghenies and the Monongahela. And Dinwiddie instructs these men to do what traders and other men can do to annoy the enemy. It sounds very petty. And Trent,
but they're already calling them the enemy at this point, so they're already thinking of them like there's going to be fighting.
But this is now where it becomes really complicated. They are the enemy, but Great Britain and France are still in friendly terms. So it's very complicated in this regard because they just want to give the French a punch of warning, but they don't want any battle. Not another one after, all the three preceding wars for half a century, as Francis Parton called it.
Exactly. Yep. And so this is essentially, these are the British, so this is the British colonies, this is the royal governors really starting a very local conflict, really, that they're hoping will have nothing to do with Britain, like the government in Whitehall. This is something that the colonies are trying to do, essentially.
Not that. So Dinwiddie, actually cited the letter of approval from the Lords of Trade, that they would allow the British settler to expand into the Ohio River under the guarantee that, every year 100 settler would be, moved into that area. Okay. So the communications are maintained between the metropole and the provinces, but both parties are sure that they do not want a interstate war. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So but he feels he has the political right to challenge the French, but at this time he doesn't actually have the authority to start a general war.
Right. So ultimately the question boils down to whose backyard is this?
Yeah, exactly.
And Aix-la-Chapelle, the treaty at Aix-la-Chapelle never addressed this. It's really the treaty's fault, right?
Yeah, that is a problem.
In fact, this is so local that Washington really has trouble. Dinwiddie has trouble gathering enough resources and conscripts for Washington's mission because many ministers at the House of Burgesses belittle Washington's account of his preceding expedition as a fiction, literally, to cite their view, and schemes to promote the interest of a private company or the Company of Ohio, Yeah, so Washington therefore leaves around the same time the Edward North party leaves, and he is under the instruction from Dinwiddie that you are to act on the defensive, but in case any attempts are made to obstruct the works or interrupt our settlements by any persons whatsoever, you are to restrain all such offenders. In case of resistance, to make prisoners of or kill or destroy them. For the rest of you are to conduct yourself as circumstances of the service shall require, to act as you shall find best for the furtherance of His Majesty's service and the good of his dominion. Again, it is emphasized that they essentially are acting on behalf of their crown, but without seeking a war. And after all, no war had been declared by the Lords of Trade. So
And nor could they. The Lords of Trade would be unable to sanction a war. It would have to be the Colonial Office and
right,
the cabinet to do such a
Mhm.
thing. So,
Mhm.
yeah, the governor of Virginia has sort of he has a mandate, definitely.
Mhm.
Though so do the French, and as you
Right.
say, because there is no determination as to who has a right,
Mhm.
apart from the Native Americans, to live in the Ohio,
Mhm.
and that is the great absurdity of all colonial wars in America at this time. You're getting this very tense situation that both governments in Paris and London are officially unaware of, except to the point they think that their guy is going to
Mhm.
settle the Ohio, and the other side is not going to bother with them because they don't want to fight.
Right. So Washington leaves with 50 men from the Virginia Regiment, with a promise of getting a reinforcement of 100 more from a private company of South Carolina, which will be trained by Captain Trent, who is kept as sort of a reserve agent in the Ohio Company. But Washington is now subject to very excruciating journey, more than his previous one. First of all, because of the difficulty of gathering all the funds, he receives a captain's salary of 8 shillings per day, which will be his perpetual source of conflict throughout his military career. And on 9th March, Washington sends this huge list of complaints to Dinwiddie, which will become an endemic problem until the Revolutionary War, I would say. And that problem was the acute lack of supplies of all sorts, especially the necessities. So it says, we daily experience the great necessity for clothing the men. And there are, quite a lot of loose, idle persons, indisciplined ones, that are quite destitute of any bivouac, and many of them without proper clothes at all, which renders them very incapable of necessary service. And Washington, in fact, says there's many of them without even shoes, others want stockings, some without shirts, and not a few of them have any coat or waistcoat to their backs. In short, they're as ill provided as they can be conceived. And on 20th, Washington, again, is Dinwiddie that, however, cannot really address this issue because ultimately he needs the approval of the other colonial officials to gather enough, a fund for this. But this was still the time when Washington had a very unstable reputation, as a very young person who is now on his debut stage. So 20th March, he is commissioned as Lieutenant Colonel of the Virginia Regiment on behalf of Joshua Fry to just march with them towards the Ohio with what little troops he has there to help Captain Trent build forts and to defend again the possessions of His Majesty against the attempts and hostilities of the French there. Meanwhile, the French also sends a force to that confluence in order to, curb the British attempt to pave their settlement there. And Washington sets out from Alexandria on the 2nd of April, 1754, again, astounded by the lack of supplies, which would bog down the entire operation for years and years. And on his way on 17th April, a commandant at Quebec named Contrecoeur, who would later be called by the British after the takeover of French Canada, the third most important man in Canada. He summons a force of 1,000 men of French from France and Canada from Fort Venango. And then on 18th April, the Half King begins to send speeches to the Virginia and Pennsylvania governor, warning them about the French encroachments to the area, and promising the Virginian and Pennsylvanians that the Indians, the Senecas, are now ready to fall upon them. You'll find us ready to encounter with them, as are yourselves. But on 19th April, even before Washington resumes communicating with the Half King, he receives 2 express letters from Captain Trent, soliciting them to send in all reinforcements as soon as possible. On top of it, the speech from the Half King in written form. It turns out that Trent or Ensign Ward, on behalf of him, had ended up surrendering that fort to Contrecoeur's force, because they only had 47 men who were mostly used for constructing the fort against 1,000 French troops de la marine. So you can imagine how fearful that must have been. And that leads Washington to summon a council of war on the 23rd of April, where he decides to focus on rallying the Indian allies as much as possible, with the Half King and the Senecas as their centrifugal force. And he makes reply to the Half King's speech, citing himself as Washington, or Count Taricarius, his Indian name, at the end, and says, "I think it would not be amiss to invite the Cherokees, Catawbas, and the Chickasaws to come to our assistance, and that there is no good understanding between them and the Indians of the Six Nations. It would be well to persuade them to make a peace with them, to our advantage, lest a great disorder engulfs the Ohio River Valley." That's about the summary. Mm-hmm. Now here, Washington shows his lack of knowledge on the Indian affairs, because one of the tribes mentioned, the Catawbas, they are under constant threat by the neighboring Oneida. And he suddenly, expects them to make a truce when the French threat is imminent between these two, long-term rivals. So yeah, this is, I think, the first sign of the fissure in his expedition.
Yeah, and also he's showing a rather he's showing his lack of understanding of even geography here, because the Cherokees live in what is roughly now Tennessee.
Right.
And
right.
the Chickasaws live somewhere roughly, I believe, they're not a very large nation either, somewhere between Georgia and Alabama.
Yeah.
So
the southern flanks.
Yeah. So he's talking complete nonsense with that.
Most likely, he is overestimating the extent of Half King's influence around his tribes. Is it because of his title, the Half King, perhaps? But the title per se indicates that he is not a king, but a Half King, and essentially a delegate of his tribes who does not wield a complete power over all the tribes.
It's interesting, yeah, and that is actually very interesting as well, because through this period, through the entire 17th into the 18th century, it was very common for almost explicitly, actually, that the British, the French, and the Spanish, maybe not so much the Spanish, but they would refer to the sachems, the chiefs, the leaders, as kings. They would call them king, the insert name here, of this nation or tribe, because that was what they associated with the way that these people ran their communities, which actually is they didn't really have a royalty system at play. Nevertheless, this represents, again, a common stream of thought for
Yeah.
people like George Washington, I'm dealing with a king here. He must have great sort of influence around. So yes, that's a good point. He may have thought, because Half King also talked a big game. He represented himself to this younger man as a very wise, very powerful figure. So Washington might have been slightly overawed by him and been given a false sense of what exactly he was dealing with here.
Right, right. So Washington is set up with his ally, this dubious ally, whose power is overestimated, unfortunately. But again, he manages to kind of assemble few Indian scouts, and he has about 50 men under his command by the beginning of May. And in mid-May, he's informed at night that the French are all employed in building their Fort Duquesne at the site where they had expelled Ensign Ward, and that the total force may amount to 1,600 men. A report which may be fictitious or not, as many of such reports tended to be during this part of time. But his supply situation in this emergency is becoming even more bleak, because he found out that the ministers in Williamsburg had rejected another appeal of his to raise the budget for the militia. And Washington literally cries out in his letter, "I would rather prefer the great toil of a daily laborer and dig for maintenance than serve under such ignoble terms. For I really don't see why the lives of His Majesty's subjects in Virginia should be of less value than of those in other parts of his American dominions." Then on the next day, Washington resorts to writing a letter of gratitude to the Half King, saying, "My brethren, I am marching vigorously towards you, for French forces will soon join them, and reinforcements will soon come to protect us from your treacherous enemy, the French," he says, waiting to resume communication with the Indian allies. And then the French finally reacts to the presence of Washington here, because on 23rd May, Contrecoeur issues a summon for an ensign named Jumonville to be sent to the British and do the same thing as Washington had done a year ago, to send a warning to the British there without impairing the relations between the two mother countries. The summon read as, "To summon you in the name of the king, by the virtue of the orders which I have from my general, I am sending Monsieur de Jumonville to call the British here to withdraw peacefully with your troops. Otherwise, sir, you will force me to compel you to do it by whatever means I think most effective for the honor of the king's arms." But at the end, he, like Dinwiddie, also underlines that it is our intention to preserve the union which exists between the two friendly princes, which means George II and Louis XV. So it's not an eye for an eye mission. Rather, for both sides, violence will be the last resort. And that will be the crux of this part of Washington's campaign. And yep, just a day after that, Washington hears back from the Half King that he just saw French about 18 miles away from the crossing point at the small river, a river named Yogiogeni, and he and the Indians will join Washington in a few days. So Washington here arrives at the Great Meadows and starts sending out light parties of horsemen to reconnoiter the terrain around and look for any French possibly encamped nearby. And only on the 27th, Washington meets the Half King again. And that night at 10 p.m., he finally follows them into the darkness, where they claim that the French were encamped since few days ago. Okay. But Washington again experiences immense difficulty here, because the weather, because of the weather and the darkness. He is, tortured by a heavy rain, with the night as black as pitch, and by a path scarcely wide enough for a man. And they were often astray for 15 and 20 minutes before they could find the path again. And they're often colliding with each other on the way, and they cannot really see anything. 7 were lost on the way, never to be found. But the rain subsides, and around midnight, I think, around, I think, daybreak, he meets the Half King again at a defile leading into this very woody terrain. And he and the Half King held a brief council of war, where it was decided to strike jointly at the French encamped right in front of them, he said. And the Half King, the Monacatucha de Oneida, and a few other Delaware scouts and the Virginia Regiment, they all are guided into the defiles. And half a mile later, there is the French camp. And that turned out to be the night bivouac of Jumonville, who were on a supposedly peaceful mission to dissuade Washington from going further. And Washington now makes an impromptu plan, discussing arrangements to envelope them from both left and right, making use of the defiles. So no intricate account of the battle had been documented, but reading the primary sources, it can be kind of inferred that there were 2 parties sent out. The first one is a party under Captain Peter Hogg, 20 men from the Virginia Regiment, the Half King, and Indians, total 13 of them, I think. And the second was another party of 20 men under Captain Adam Stephen, who would accompany Washington until the Revolutionary War, and an ensign named William Laperoni, an ensign of French descent, the only man in Washington's regiment who could speak French fluently. And then they follow the path, tracking the traces of the French encampments. And then the first group tries to strike the French first. Washington here records in diary the moment. I thereupon, in conjunction with the Half King and the Monacatucha, formed a disposition to attack them from all sides. So when the attack began, it was between, I think, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. And the French are taken completely by surprise. They're like begging Washington to stop. And this battle, Washington's first taste of battle, ends in less than 15 minutes. So Stephen actually accuses the French of being the first to load their muskets, but Washington's journal doesn't really make clear who had fired first. So we're pretty certain that the French had not fired first, or even if they had, it was not from some ill intention, I would say. Mm-hmm. But Washington orders his men to continue firing, okay? But he admits later that some of the French were asleep and some eating, and a great confusion followed. And the French tried retreating northward in vain, where they re-encountered the Half King's party and were on the verge of becoming annihilated from both sides. So Jumonville, comes out and hands Washington this summon he had received from Contrecoeur, which consists of the explanations on, the motives of his visit, and that his need for maintaining the peace between the two. So just as he was reading that summon, something extremely shocking takes place. The Half King all of a sudden raises his hatchet and says, "You are not yet dead, my father," and smashes his brain with the hatchet he's holding. To wash his hand in the dead ensign's brain. Okay, Well, this can be interpreted as a ritual gesture to express his, complete end of ties with the French who had enslaved him during his childhood, and as to send out a warning to all the other French around not to encroach on the area he had regarded as his own dominion. Washington is just shocked and doesn't know what to do because what Half King had committed is completely against the instructions of both Jumonville, both Contrecoeur and Dinwiddie. And he makes a very, short recollection of this moment, saying, "We killed Monsieur de Jumonville, commanding this party, with 9 others. We wounded one and made 21 prisoners, among whom were Monsieur Laforce, who had raided Gist's plantation just a few days ago, Mr. Drouillon, and 2 other cadets. The Indians scalped the dead and took most of their arms. The prisoners would be deported to Williamsburg, where they would be denied repatriation for some time, under Dinwiddie's pretext that the French were clearly hostile in their intentions, according to the summon retrieved from Jumonville. And one of the survivor named Monceau manages to reach Fort Duquesne on the 2nd of June, and he tells Contrecoeur everything that had happened, which causes chaos in the fort. How can he breach the law of nations like this? Is Contrecoeur's reaction. So to cite his letter of complaint to Marquis de Duquesne, Contrecoeur wrote, "You will be surprised at the unworthy manner in which the English behave. It is what we had never seen, even among the least civilized nations." So he is delegating the blame to the English, we can see. He is even implying that the Indians could have remained under control, but that Washington or whoever was commanding them had tacitly allowed or tolerated that kind of behavior. Okay? So it serves as a warning to the French, reinforcing this mutual threat perception in the Ohio Valley area. And this incident was named the Affair of Jumonville. And after it was officially published in pamphlets in French historian Moreau's Annals of the 18th century, it served as a permanent reminder of the barbarity of their enemy, and would continue to instill morale on the French armies at home and abroad. So Jumonville, in this sense, had become a martyr and left a stain, a permanent stain on Washington's career as that of a murderer. Because French painting made at this time depicted Washington aiming his own musket directly into Jumonville, which is completely inaccurate, but was enough to agitate all the Frenchmen.
Yeah, absolutely. The Jumonville affair, Jumonville massacre, is something that shouldn't have happened. Absolutely. The fact that Washington just decided that this was a hostile war party coming to attack him is at the root of the problem here. He didn't even try to. He completely had them at his mercy, and he didn't try to get them to surrender or explain their business. He just allowed them to start shooting, and that seems to be what happened. So the French had great cause for outrage because we didn't slaughter you in the forest when you came to see us. I have no idea what Washington was thinking, to be honest, with that.
I have 2 explanations.
Okay, go for it. Go for it.
You listen to the Half King too much. The Half King all of a sudden came up to his post at night and said, there was a hostile French party. Not to mention, the previous dispatches received the rumor that 1,600 French troops were on the way. that might have skewed his perception. And second, there was this part in Dinwiddie's instruction that you may resort to violence as a last resort. Washington saw this as a time to use his last resort, I think. And what really like frustrates me or even amuses me about this time is on 31st May, Washington writes to his brother John. He has the gut to write this, that I heard the bullets whistle, and believe me, there was something charming in the sound. So he's not realizing what he had done.
That is a fascinating insight into Washington's state of mind at the time. He obviously had no clue on any level of what he'd done or allowed to happen. And it's also interesting that the French blame him for allowing the Half King's warriors to get out of hand. I think that's a very New France sort of opinion about how bad the English are at dealing with their allies, because the French were very proud of the fact that their officers could speak the native languages, they lived with them, they dressed like them, and the French were generally of the opinion that, well, we would never have allowed that to happen, sort of thing, which is another interesting little
except for William Johnson, who cultivated friendship with Chief Hendrick and other Indians. I mean, like the French propaganda went such to an extent, like the Jesuit missionaries even taught their converts that it was the English who had crucified the Jesus. Can you believe that?
That's very interesting. And William Johnson is a very interesting figure. He actually does take a more, what you might call, French approach to diplomacy with the Iroquois and stuff like that, and he's very instrumental with getting them on the side of the British to fight rather than staying neutral, which is actually kind of bad for the Iroquois but good for the British. He's a very interesting figure, which we don't have time to go into today because I think we're going to have to restart the call again.
Of course.
But that is the massacre at Jumonville Glen. Some people call it a battle. It's unfortunately it really can't be classified as such because did Washington lose any men? Was anybody even wounded?
Oh, I think there was barely anyone wounded, I think. I can't recall the exact figure, but in any regard, it wasn't really significant.
Okay, so the French are absolutely infuriated by this, and they're going to make a lot of capital propaganda-wise from it going forwards. But in the immediacy, a response is required, essentially, and they send and they respond. And if Washington thinks this is an accurate taste of what wilderness fighting is like, he's in for a bit of a rough surprise.
Thank you for watching that video, guys. Please like and subscribe on the way out. And remember, you can use my exclusive code HISTORYLAND for 50% off your subscription at Armchair History TV, where I will be making exclusive content for everybody who is signed up. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you again for another adventure in Historyland the next time.